In telling the story of my grandfather's life, it's impossible to separate the fact from the fiction, the man from the myth. The best I can do is tell it the way he told me. Doesn't always make sense, and most of it never happened. But that's the kind of story this is. One last scene has finally given me the kind of onus and drive to actually get my first YouTube video done and up. My bar behind my video is now, it's missed the boat so much the boats went round the world. Raven wants to be in the video apparently. I saw Big Fish at, I think, the age of 10 or 11. Saw it in my local cinema with my family. We grew up with Tim Burton films. It's pretty obvious if you look at me. We'd watch stuff like The Nightmare Before Christmas every year, and it was a film that stayed with me. That, Amelie, were two of the biggest inspiration on me as a writer going forth. And yeah, I fell in love with magic realism because of Big Fish. Why I've chosen this for my one last scene is because some movies you just adore because they're a good film. Technically, you like the acting, it's just a good story. Sometimes it helps you deal with things in your own life, or it feels like someone is speaking to you through the screen. For me, Big Fish at first was just, it was a fantastic movie. I loved the imagery, the cinematography, the colour. I loved all of it. In the early 2010, when I started university, my Dede, or my grandpa, Dede's Turkish for grandpa, started to tell me the story of his life. We did kind of oral interviews and I've taken notes. My Dede's life story, my mum, my aunt, even himself, they'd all tried to write the story of his life. And for my mum and aunts, it was too close, too traumatic for them to actually write it down for him. Then I come along and I'm both someone who loves writing and someone who is at that point seemingly kind of getting into history and probably be a historian. So it's kind of like I was kind of meant to write the story of my Dede, my grandpa's life. They'd all assumed it would work best as a memoir until I came along and realised what my Dede was telling me was a fairy tale. It was Dickensian, it was magic realism, and it was a tall tale at times. He ended up in a place called Dede at the age of 8 when his father died of cancer. His mother was disabled and him and his sister were young, so their neighbourhood in Aycetin, Istanbul, phoned up the authorities who took them away to Dede, which was the equivalent of a Turkish kind of poorhouse, orphanage. It's more modern than a Victorian kind of analogue to that, but it was still an institution and his life was never the same again because of this. He ended up on the streets at points, he ended up in borstels, and it was getting into catering. Ended up with a life a bit like the characters in Grand Budapest Hotel. That was how he found a purpose in his life and he found that he loved people. He was a people person, and he ended up becoming like Richie in The Bear. That kind of guy. He's the guy who would come up to you, like Mr. Cheddar as well, and just make sure you were having a nice meal. He worked his way up to that though, obviously from busboy onwards, and it was something he was always proud of. Throughout his life there was odd points, like men who had wheels for legs that he told me about, a guy who played a national anthem on a vegetable to him and his pals. There was a hole in the wall that they would sneak out to swim in the Bosphorus, and they nicknamed it after like one of the teachers so they couldn't get in trouble. He would swim alongside ocean liners when he ran away from men when he was living on the street. Kind of saw them almost as kind of like monsters, like jinn who were chasing him. He played football, semi-professional. It was like a hospitality league, and at one point they played for a businessman called the King of Pineapples, and I kind of imagine someone like John Goodman playing this guy in a film of his life. So many magical aspects of his life story, even though there's dark points in it as well. He had a horrible life at points and saw it through this fantastical lens to cope with it. Like Edward Bloom, my Dede was that kind of people person who told stories, who kind of people gravitated to him. In the novel of his life, brought us together. In a lot of ways, me and my Dede, my grandpa, were very different. He had been on the street at points, legit starving, whereas at points he had to look at me and wonder why I had an eating disorder in my teen years. I was someone who accepted what he was taught in institutions because it was just propaganda that got taught in the schools there. And I was someone that questioned it, and he didn't like that at times. I was LGBT, whereas my Dede had some fucked up views about gay people because he kind of saw it as equivalent at times to the men that would chase him and try to attack him. So there was a lot of things that divided me and my grandpa. Yet in writing the story of his life, we began to connect in a way we hadn't before. It brought us much closer together. Big Fish's ending matters so much to me because it's about how stories can be, how things really happened. Sometimes the best lens we have is through the eyes of storytellers. The first ending to talk about in this video is of course the most important. Throughout the film we've seen how him and William have struggled to communicate, though surprisingly they are quite similar. Throughout the film we see that Will is not a lost cause. He's a storyteller like his dad, it's just he prioritises the truth. At the very start we have that great lapse where you see at first he's as excited as anyone to hear his father's stories, but over time he drifts away and he kind of just sees it as this negative thing. When he talks to the doctor and finds out the actual story of his birth, and he's disappointed to hear the truth. There's all these kind of little signs, even the fact that he finds out his dad wasn't a cheater, that was much more complex. There's all these things building up to that incredible one last scene with him and his father and how his father goes. Everything is in place for him to completely communicate in an honest way with his father by telling a story just like him. This ending is so important to me, besides how cinematically amazing it is, because it's the end I wish my grandfather, my Dede, had got. He was a big fish. It deserved to swim off. His funeral was at the start of February 2019. I'd been working in Edinburgh and had to rush home when I heard the news. I was the last person in my Dede and late grand's house. I was just in time to give him one last hug before the undertakers came, and unfortunately he no longer felt like my Dede or grandpa. His death had been slow yet quick, cancer diagnosis, and then within a month starving himself, and the conditions, the effects of this illness had killed him. Knowing that I wouldn't finish the story in time for him to see it in print, to see it finished, it's one of my biggest failures, and I'll never fully lose the shame I have about it. But I managed to write, obviously with everything in the middle not done. I produced the ending to his book and read it to him so he could at least have that before he went. Unfortunately, like the doctor, kind of been annoyed about people talking to people in hospitals that probably don't hear. I read it to him and he was doped up and on a lot of morphine, so I don't know if he fully heard it. I just hope he heard some of it. And so yet again, the story of his life, his tales that made his life so fantastical and amazing, it brought us together in the last moments we had together. Between tears, we all giggled at his funeral, told stories. Like for instance, War of the Worlds was his favourite album of music, and it played as he came in his coffin. There was a recording he had done of my mum and aunts, but they're all kind of reacting to the aliens appearing It sounds a bit cringy, I've never heard it, but it's just like them, oh my god, the aliens are here. And my Dede, like me, he was a filmmaker. You've seen his filmmaking throughout this video. Every year, every passing year, I see more of myself that I can see in him, more to connect with him even though he's gone, and things that he's left us. There's always kind of more to find out about him, more to kind of see, and being able to watch some of his videos that I've had transferred has been especially kind of important. It's made me feel like he's here again. For me, Big Fish's When Last Seen is so important because at times, like, because we were so different, it could feel like communication. You can never fully communicate and know him, and he could never fully communicate with me and know me. And right, life goes on with my Dede. I found a way to communicate with him, and like Will, to finally connect with him. There's so many little kind of parts of the ending when they're racing to the water that are magical, like the fact his father doesn't weigh anything anymore. Amidst the hospital orderlies, suddenly there's a policeman chasing them. A giant appears out of nowhere to help push the churchgoers out of the way. My Dede was connected to water all of his life. He was born into a basin of water that he promptly pished in. He would swim in the Bosphorus growing up alongside ocean liners, as I've said. He never swam professionally, but he was like one of those Turkish guys you'd see on holiday, jumping off like pretty high cliffs right into the sea with salt water on his skin, kind of just in the sun, just loving life. And because of that, my novel about him starts like this. It starts with water, and I think it's going to end with water. Big Fish is such a massive influence on me, emotionally, creatively, as someone autistic. It's helped me process so much and kind of put into context the life of my Dede and my relationship to him. I relate a lot as well as kind of as a storyteller relating to Edward. I relate to Will because I once fucked up a family myth. My dad's side of the family had this belief that my great-grand Jessie came here speaking only Gaelic and was from the Isle of Lewis, I think it was, and I discovered that her family had basically been from around Glasgow and then Urquhart and Logie, so we might be actual Urquharts. But yeah, there was no islands in our family history, and I discovered that about 2 years ago. And so it's kind of funny to joke about my gaga, my grandpa and my dad's side telling this tall tale, and it just kind of unravelling because a historian poked a bit too much into it. I'm kind of cheating because there is technically 3 endings to Big Fish. Not just the scene about how he goes, but the second one where we see the actual truth, the kind of kernels of truth that were at the centre of every story that Edward Bloom told his son. We see Criddle and his wife and his mother, played by Jessica Lange, at the funeral, and then start to see all the characters from the stories appear. This isn't a tall tale, this is reality. So we see the elements of each person that he based the kind of fantastical elements of his story on. So for instance, the 2 Korean twins are not conjoined, they're just identical twins, and one of them is with Buscemi apparently. Even Danny DeVito's still the leader of a circus, but his hat's not as Tim Burton-y and fantastical. He's just an old guy, probably not a werewolf. Carol is definitely a giant, but he's not 15 foot tall. He's kind of still gigantic for a human, 7 to 8 foot tall. Final one is the ending shot of Edward Bloom transformed into the massive catfish in the river that had been near his home.
So he said he'll fight the giant who is 15 feet tall. No way! Dad, that's right, isn't it?
Pretty much.
It ends with him telling the stories like his dad did, in a very similar way to his father. The last lines as we see him as a catfish leaving are, "That was my father's final joke, I guess." A man tells his stories so many times that he becomes the stories that live on after him, and in that way he becomes immortal.
His head open. I had to split my dad's head open. His mum, Mumini, had said, you know, don't do that to him, don't do that to him. He says, he was upset because you're ill. He says, I'm lying here dying, and he's annoying me, for goodness sake.
Long live Scottish Scotland. Yes, we are the Ochterchuchters, you know. And here, this one like that, far away, far away, far away. It's fantastic. This is the first child I've ever seen rejecting Santa.
Where it was they had made the boy a piece of wood, and they had made wood for some, I don't know how they did it.
Jessica, I'll take it. Jessica, I'm taking your
The perfumer who kicked him out because he was jealous of him, remember that?
Yeah, the perfumer, I don't know why he was jealous. This guy took Dede on.
Working for him for nothing.
At 14, Dede found out he was having an affair. Dede was taking
Oh, Daddy, say hello.
Jessica.
Yeah!
Loving Christmas family. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year when it comes.